Hello and welcome to another interview. I'm Friederike from the Cloud Report. I'm joined with Carsten, also from Cloudical, and today we are talking with Brian Gracely from RedHat. But please introduce yourself and say what you are doing and what RedHat is doing right now.
Yeah, hi, good to be good to be with both of you. My name is Brian Gracely. I'm Senior Director of Product Strategy at RedHat. I focus on our cloud platform products as well as the work that we do in building new, what people call cloud native applications.
So cool. Just tell us more about that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, sure. So I've been at RedHat for 4 years, a little more than 4 years. So I've been around this space of, people building new types of applications. This week is KubeCon, so the whole cloud native computing foundation is coming together. We've been around for that whole thing. I'm very lucky. I get a chance to kind of work with companies on all of their new things, right? So when they come to us and they say, we want to change the company, we want to build a new application to interact with our customers, we want to, go after big data and AI and ML, like we get to work on all this sort of new fun stuff. So it's a cool job. It's a neat place to be in the company. And when KubeCon week comes along, we're sort of front and center because we build all of the Kubernetes technology.
I'm so excited because RedHat did a lot of announcement this week, right? Mm-hmm. Like OpenShift with virtualization platform, advanced cluster management, and so on and so forth. So many things that should excite the cloud native community, right? So can you elaborate into that a little bit, because I feel like there's a lot of interest around that.
Yeah, so we've been doing Kubernetes for a long time. I feel like sometimes we're the old folks in this crowd. We were, along with Google, the first company to build a Kubernetes product. So we've been lucky enough to have the companies that work with us. As every large company does, they have lots of demands and lots of applications. So this week is always interesting. We announce things that just to give you kind of a high level summary. We announced updates to our Kubernetes platform, which is the big community. So the newest version of Kubernetes, better scale, new security. But then we announced the ability to bring virtualization to Kubernetes, which is the first time that's come along. So in the past, it was always containers, which is a great technology. Everybody knows Docker. This brings virtualization, so virtual machines, could be Windows applications, could be your SAP application, now can run underneath Kubernetes. So that's really powerful. I no longer have to have 2 systems to run things. I can run one. So that's a whole domain. It talks about a certain kind of customers. We introduced a platform that we call the Advanced Cluster Manager. This is our large scale management platform. So as we have customers, let's say like BMW, for example, that runs applications for thousands and millions of cars. In order to maintain those systems, they need these very advanced management systems. They need to be able to make sure that they're secure, that they're going to be compliant in all the countries. So we announced the Advanced Cluster Management System that helps us manage things at very large scale in any cloud environment. And then we always announce some things that are kind of bleeding edge or really kind of pushing forward. We announced some work that we're doing in a new community that's around a new technology or a new concept called GitOps. So the idea that I want to automate how I deploy things. I want to use this tool that almost every developer on the planet uses, which is called Git. And then I want to combine together kind of the operational part of that. How do I deploy things consistently? And so we announced some really interesting work that we're doing with the GitOps community, with the Argo community. So the announcements are all over the place, but when you've been working on this space for so long, you work with the ops teams, you work with the development teams, you work with people in security. We always want to give them a little bit of a new technology every KubeCon.
You managed multi-cluster management, and I've read about cloud native management. Please tell us about that.
Sure. So
how is this working?
It's a great question. When people first started using Kubernetes, a lot of times it was existing technology groups, central IT, and so they would build systems exactly the way that they had built previous systems. They were going to build big centralized systems. everybody would come to them, request resources. They would figure out a process to deploy that. And that worked fine because people were getting access to Kubernetes and it was new and it was cool. But then, as always happens in technology, people get curious. The technologists want to learn things, and they started saying, I can do this myself. Like, can I have my own cluster? Can I deploy things myself? And especially with open source, you don't have to ask anybody, right? It's always freely available. So we would see companies that would start off with 2 or 3 large clusters, and then maybe a year or a year and a half later, they'd call us and they'd say, hey, we have like 100 clusters now. So how are we going to keep up with all this, right? And some of them we don't know anything about. They're managed by a small division of the company. So ultimately, they came back to us and said, we need something that manages a lot of clusters. It needs to be easy to spin them up. So the ease part needs to be there, self-service. But at the same time, they said, I don't want them to make a mistake and like leave the security holes open. I don't want them to make a mistake and have the auditors come along and say, you're out of compliance, you need to shut that down. So the 2 things that really come together with multi-cluster management is it needs to be easy to get new resources, so self-service and simplicity, but it also has to be able to apply the right security policies and governance policies and know where everything is. So that's really what that platform does. It helps those companies that have been successful hopefully be more secure, but also not get in the way of those people that are creative.
And what's the cloud native approach there?
Well, I think the cloud native approach is still learning. The thing you learn about cloud native is there's never one approach. There's always multiple. And people
That's nicely
argue
said, by the way.
Yeah, it's people will always argue passionately that their approach is better than the other approach. What we end up having to do is we work with some companies and some groups and some communities that are passionate about one thing. And so when I talked about GitOps, there is a passion about that way of doing cloud native management, right? It's all driven by Git, by the development teams. And then there is the ones that are probably more driven by the security teams and the operations teams. That's kind of where multi-cluster manager comes into play. And when you're talking to companies, you can either be very pragmatic and say, we only do it this way. But far more often these days, what we find is there is no one group that makes decisions anymore, whether it's large organizations or smaller. So you really want to give them technology that, if that's the way that they love that, so they love GitOps versus they love multi-cluster manager, you have to say, great, like there's nothing wrong with that. We need to support you in a good supportable way. And so yeah, but it does come back to this thing. There's never only one way to do things in the cloud native world. And it always makes it interesting this time of year.
The thing that I was pumped about was the virtualization aspect. Because, there are projects around like KubeVirt, for example, but having that integrated into OpenShift is a very, very interesting thing, because it brings together several worlds, not just 2, several worlds. So can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. So like I mentioned earlier, the early Kubernetes was all about containers. And so it tended to, attract, it worked for a certain kind of application. It tended to be newer applications, and it tended to be, people who were really curious about something new. But there was always conversations we would have with companies, even if they were successful with OpenShift and Kubernetes and containers, and they would say, but we have lots of other applications. They run in virtual machines. They've run in virtual machines for 10 years now. Do you ever see those 2 worlds coming together? And we said, a few years ago, we said, well, I don't know. There's a lot you can do with containers. And they just kept coming back and saying, yeah, but you need to understand some things we don't want to change them. But we'd love to save some cost. And so we created this project called KubeVirt, as you mentioned. KubeVirt's the open source project. And what it does is it brings a virtual machine. It looks exactly, it is a standard virtual machine. It runs the full operating system, Windows and Linux, but it brings it under control of Kubernetes, so that when Kubernetes wants to launch an application, make it scale, tear it down, back it up, it uses all the same things that Kubernetes uses for containers. So all of a sudden, if you're a customer or a company, you can have both your virtual machine applications as well as your container applications in the same system. And that's kind of the first thing that people look at is they go, oh, okay, you know, some consolidation, that means probably some cost savings, some consistency. The other thing that we found was we would talk to companies and we would say, well, what part of virtualization are you frustrated with? What makes you think that this is a good idea? And they would say, you know, our virtualization team is motivated and told, be stable, right? You don't need to make changes so fast. Be stable. Uptime is the most important thing. And then we talked to their development team and we would say, what are you frustrated about? And they would say, when we ask for a virtual machine, sometimes it takes a month or it takes 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
And we would say,
because they say stay stable.
yeah, stay stable, right? So we had this kind of conflict internally. And the other thing that this does is it now makes virtual machines self-service. It makes them as fast, you can get them as quickly as containers. So we think, you know, in the early companies we've talked to, the developers are so excited because they don't want to think about containers or virtual machines. They just go, I know what my application needs. I just want to go do work. And now they have direct access to both of them. So that's pretty excited.
Awesome. In your introduction, you said that you are also responsible for hybrid cloud approaches and so on and so forth. So that is part of what you are working with. Can you have our viewers and readers with you? Can you bring our readers and viewers
give them what does that really mean?
into that world? Because I feel like specifically hybrid cloud, multi-cloud perhaps, those are some of the very big trends nowadays. And I feel like OpenShift and RedHat is very well prepared for that.
Yeah, it's in the simplest way to think about this is you know, if you went back several years, people had great data centers and their applications ran fine, and they weren't sure about the public cloud. You know, I'm not sure if it's in my country because we may have locality reasons. I don't know if it's how expensive it is. I've heard maybe it has some security issues. And nowadays, the public clouds, the big 3, 4, 5 public clouds, people feel fairly comfortable with them. They're growing. They feel comfortable with them. Their developers have probably done a project or two out there, whether they were allowed to or not. And so what happens is companies now come to us and they say, we'd like to take advantage of that where it makes sense. We're still going to probably run some things in our data center, but we want to take advantage of this other service because it might make sense for our business, right? So right now, obviously with everybody working from home, you know, remote work is totally different. Maybe they want to build a new application because you're a grocery store and you're not interacting with your customers the same way. So there's an element of the public cloud that's exciting to people. And so what hybrid and multi-cloud is really doing is it's saying, we want to help companies have access to both of those types of resources. The challenge is they're very different, right? How you run your data center is very different than the public cloud works, and how like AWS works is different than Google or different than Azure. Is there a way we can make things more consistent in those different environments? And so a lot of what Red Hat does, and you know, we call our architecture and our strategy open hybrid cloud. OpenShift is probably that core product that helps make things consistent. And then once you have that consistency on-prem and in the public cloud, once you go to build your applications, it's that much less work that you have to worry about, that much less security you have to worry about. And so, you know, I'll give you a great example. I used the BMW example before, but they're a great example. They use the public cloud to help manage the scale of new applications in cars, their concierge application, but they use the private cloud for their autonomous driving because it needs to be local and the bandwidth and the latency needs to be really close. And so, you know, same company, different aspects of the business, but they use OpenShift to have a level of consistency so their teams know what they're doing. So it's really that problem space, which is I want to use all the best resources, but how do I make them not so complicated?
Speaking of different aspects there, like public cloud, private cloud, there's another thing that you basically made an announcement this week about, which is not identical, but closely related to some extent, which is the new edge computing support you are basically delivering with OpenShift, because that then it basically extends the cloud to you know, your location, where you are,
right.
where your sensors are, and so on and so forth. So can you explain a little bit what is that all about from OpenShift's and RedHat's perspective?
Yeah, so edge is really interesting because edge means different things to different companies. So, I'll give you an example. If you think about like if you throw a rock in a pond and you sort of like concentric circles sort of go out, that's kind of what edge computing is these days. It's if you're a telephone company, edge computing might mean 5G, faster mobile phones, but it also might mean you're now doing sensors on light poles and telephone poles in a city. Maybe you're tracking traffic patterns or weather patterns or something. If you're a manufacturing company, edge computing might simply mean your manufacturing plants in kind of very small footprint. You can only fit it in a small closet. If you are a retail customer, you might be wanting to do things that are really local to the stores. You might have grocery stores and delivery stores and restaurants, and so what we've seen is more and more companies really like containers. They like that it's a constant way to package your application. It's a constant way to secure your application. And so they're asking us, how do I put containers out closer to the edge, my applications closer to the edge? And then I want Kubernetes to help me with that. So yeah, we made an announcement this week that we're making a smaller form factor of OpenShift to be able to be in those further out edge locations. And we continue to work with enterprise companies and telephone companies and cloud providers to keep making the form factor smaller so that they can take, instead of 1,000 applications, maybe it's 20 applications, and then maybe even further out, it's 2 or 3 applications. So yeah, that was the big announcement, was really a smaller, more condensed footprint that makes it easier for them to have the right price point on the edge of their networks.
Great. So you have edge and multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, cloud native management. What could come next?
Yeah. Well, this week's announcements really, they feel like they touch all the clouds.
Yeah.
Other times we make announcements, a lot of those are kind of infrastructure centric, right? They matter to the infrastructure teams and security teams. We talk about virtualization. You'll hear us make announcements maybe in the next quarter that are very application centric, right? So we'll talk about faster Java applications, and we'll talk about helping people modernize a Windows application. So we always have to find a balance between giving the infrastructure and security teams great tools, kind of foundational tools, and then we will make announcements from quarter to quarter that help the developers and make them more productive. So yeah, the next time we talk, maybe we'll talk about great new applications.
What we see with Red Hat, with the IBM world, with those customer environments, is basically that it gets more and more mature, right? At KubeCon, it was basically said like 76% of all enterprises are currently thinking of how and whether to move on to the Kubernetes track. So what does that mean strategically for Red Hat, for OpenShift, and for your overall strategy in that regard? Where's the train heading to?
Yeah, I think for us, we've been a really early adopter. So our approach has the nice thing about these technologies is they've always been there to say you can run them wherever you want. So the hybrid or openness of cloud has been foundational. We've talked about that for a long time. When the IBM acquisition happened with Red Hat, they were coming around to talking about multi-cloud and hybrid cloud. They have fully adopted Red Hat's approach to openness, right? So we're seeing more and more open source projects from both IBM and Red Hat. You've seen the entire industry really say, we're no longer going to fight over just public cloud or on premises. It's hybrid cloud or it's multi-cloud. So we feel like, the decisions we made several years ago are really kind of where the industry has moved towards. And our whole company, whether it's what we do in automation, what we do in applications, what IBM is doing, is really kind of already aligned to those things. And so for us, it lets us go to companies, customers, prospective customers, and say, look, we're not just new to this. It's always easy to jump on a new buzzword or a new bandwagon. We've been doing this for a long time. Our customers have grown maybe about 70% year over year for 5-6 years. So we announced that we went over 2,000 OpenShift customers, actually way more than 2,000. Back at Red Hat Summit, even in May, we said, we have about 1,700. So the growth keeps coming. And I think a lot of it's just because we made a very early bet, which probably seemed a little crazy at the time, that we were going to make portable technology that could run across multiple clouds. We were going to bet on Kubernetes back when there was 100 people that came to KubeCon instead of 25,000 people. And it's worked out really well for us.
So you are basically continuing on that road, but just with my words, you are feeding the maturing market because you have the experience to do that, right? And you still stay ahead of the game with what you do. So, you dropped us some lines there, like, look, the next announcement will be around developers and faster Java and so, because that's, from my perspective, quite obvious things that are of interest to the enterprise world as well, right? So it reaches those levels.
Yeah, we're always innovating. There's always work that we do that's, this whole space around edge is, I don't know, I can't predict the future, but there are people who are saying edge will be even bigger than cloud because it reaches into cities, into towns, into cars, and we're already beginning to see that. I mean, we announced a customer this week that deployed 900,000 water devices, right, in their city, in their municipalities, right? 900,000 is an enormous number of things to have to manage. It's more than you normally manage for laptops or mobile devices. We see companies that are putting technology in cars, technology in cities, technology in space. So yeah, edge will be another one of those areas we'll talk about for years to come as to all the variations of it. Do
you want to add a topic? What is at your heart, or what we should know?
Famous last words.
Yeah, I'd love to give you one. The great challenge at this time of year with KubeCon is you come out of the event, you come out of the week, you're really kind of excited because if you're a technologist, you're like, man, there are so many new things. Even if you're on the business side, you look at it and you go, there's so many companies, it's a robust market. The great challenge of this week is always, how do I narrow down what's important to me? And the good news is, if you're interested in infrastructure, lots of really cool announcements. If you're interested in application development, there's always cool announcements. If you're interested in sort of a market niche like edge, or I shouldn't say a niche, giant market segment like edge, there's so much to get you excited about. The hardest part is you don't want to walk away from this week thinking, I have to know everything. I need to know everything about everything. It's just too much. So yes. my guidance is, pick an area that you think is cool. There will be so much for you to dig into, and don't worry about the rest of it, because there's just too many things to keep up with, and it keeps this area fun.
So what was your highlight?
Oh, to me, the technology is always cool, but I love to hear customer stories. I mean, at the end of the day, if companies don't use this to make their company better or make something for the customers, it's not interesting. So, to me, it's always our customer stories. So, we had a bank customer doing interesting things to prevent credit card fraud. We had companies helping, better manage people getting through airports, which we don't do as much these days, but I'm usually a traveler in airports. I love customer stories because it's the fulfillment of somebody had an idea and then they figured out all the technology to go make that happen. So those are the things that get me the most excited.
Great. So thank you. Thank you for your time. It was a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah.
A lot of insights we gained from this interview. So it was pretty beneficial.
Good. I'm glad. It was great to talk to you. I'd love to talk to you again sometime.